Cool, morning everyone. Yeah, it has taken me a very long time to get here, but I'm super honored to speak to you all today. I thought the timing would be right. I know it's like a year later that I'm coming to speak, but I'm happy I'm here today. So what I want to talk to you about today is just a bit of the work I do and the process behind it, but also obviously aligned with the global theme of Muse for Creative Mornings. So just to kind of contextualize what I do, where I come from. So I'm third generation South African Chinese, and I work in an independent studio down the road in the Woodstock Exchange called Only Today. The name, we literally needed to put a name on the door in 5 minutes, so we thought Only Today was a good name, and that's the name of the studio, and it kind of stuck. And then the lettering actually worked out perfectly for each window panel, so it always actually works out great when that happens. So in the studio there's 6 other amazing independent designers, and we sometimes collaborate together depending on the scope of the work, but mostly we're all quite busy individually, so we run our projects on our own most of the time. This is my really extremely messy desk on the left hand side, but that photo's from like 2 years ago, so it's a lot worse than that now actually currently. So this is just the workspace. Everything in the space is split between all the designers, so this obviously makes a lot of business sense going forward for like if you're independent and you're doing overheads and trying to run a business. When you split the cost 7 ways, it works out quite nicely. And so the global topic Muse, I thought about this a lot, and it's actually probably one of the hardest talks I've probably tried to put together. Just because I think it's something that's so different for everyone. I think the terminology Muse is interchangeable with a lot of other words. Obviously inspiration comes to mind, but I thought what I'll talk about today is my muse throughout my kind of career and how it's changed from when I was in high school to where I am now. So a lot of people say like inspiration or your muse is like an amalgamation of your entire life, of like your heritage, your culture, your friends and family, your hobbies, and somewhere in the middle, everyone loves a good Venn diagram, is muse. And I think it is all those things, but it's not. Like I think those are kind of givens for anyone of your entire being, like the way you kind of perceive or see the world. And so I'm not kind of disregarding that at all. I think that's great and that's a natural organic thing. But I think for muse, for everyone here, whether you're in a creative field or you're an accountant or you're in production or anything, there is like your muse changes from time to time, and it works outside of these categories a lot. So what I wanted to speak about was a project that I worked on when I was 16 in high school, and this was one of the most important works I've ever made in my life. In high school, my design teacher, Andrew Putter, who's an amazing person, posed a question to our class to say, like, do you think you could make something that would be viable to actually be sold and make money from something creative? So I was like, okay, well, that's pretty challenging. Like, we're in high school, we kind of just do maths and science, and then you don't really think of making money from doing anything creative. So myself and like a 3D designer and a sound designer at the time, when we were in high school, we're using cracked software of Photoshop, Flash, which is ridiculous, Fruity Loops to make music. We kind of formed this crew. We thought we were really cool, but we called this thing I Eat Soup. And it was a digital magazine, and what it was a platform for designers our age, 16, 14, 15. So we were basically going to all the kids in art class and asking them to submit their work to our our publication, which was a digital magazine, which was heavily kind of visually inspired by another magazine called Suburban Magazine. And so this was all built in Flash, can you believe it, in Photoshop. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I had so much fun in building all this work, where we showcased different like creative people within the school. So I went to Rondebosch Boys, and it was pretty much just the kids in the school and what they were doing, and then people that we looked up to. And like it was crazy. Like I didn't know how to use Photoshop. I kind of was really interested in layers. I didn't know how to use vectors properly. Like my sister's at the back, and she's a designer. And actually, growing up looking at her, like she was a huge inspiration for me to become like a graphic designer, or what graphic design was. So yeah, thanks, Lise. And like this was something I made like probably more than 12 years ago, and you could choose different tracks and play it while you're looking at the magazine. There was stuff about Circus Ninja. This was actually a friend of mine, Anis, from Young and Lazy, back at the time when he was still interested in design. And this was like an interview I did with him years ago. So it's amazing to see how far that's all come now. And from this, we actually managed to get this magazine in a store called Bread and Butter, which was owned by Kim Stern. And there was one in Cavendish Square and one in Rosebank in Joburg. And we managed to sell like 300 copies of this thing. I was like, what is going on? Like, we've literally, like, we burnt these CDs like in my bedroom, like these mini CDs that people still use CDs. You would put them in your computer and it would auto load, and you would like run through the magazine. And my sister did all the printing, I think, for the covers. So yeah, super cost effective, made huge profit margins. I was like, this is great. I was like, cool, I can make kind of a living off design work or something creative. But this project was so pivotal for me because it kind of validated what I wanted to do with my life, like something creative, and then the fact that I could have made like money from it. Going after high school, while I was in high school, I actually worked for a lot of young designers, YE, Young Designers Emporium, for 2 fashion labels there, where I was doing a lot of print work and that sort of stuff, and I learned a lot about silk screening and production methods. After that, I studied at Vega. After Vega, I worked at a small design studio called The President, which was amazing. And my muse then, or the feelings I had then, was I had to work really hard to impress my boss, and that was like literally that drove me to like work really hard and understand about design and layout and production methods and different printing techniques. So like there was stuff that I took from when I was in high school and then into my first job. And what that felt like, and how your muse can change organically as you grow up and your responsibilities change, or your contextual space changes around the work you need to deliver. So coming back to now, most of the brands I'm showing now are all local brands. So I do a lot of identity work, and that's actually really rewarding for me to see a lot of new South African businesses coming up in entrepreneurship. That really inspires me to see a lot of South African people following their dreams and want to make their own business. So from a designer's perspective, that's inspiring for me. And what's amazing, I see 2 of my clients sitting in the same row next to each other, which is amazing, and also very scary because they can crap me out if I do anything wrong. But this work here is all local work, so I do a lot of identity work, which is like brand marks and word marks and systems and how that all works into place. But the most important thing about building brands for clients or for people is actually telling their story. It's not about telling my story or putting my aesthetic on top of their business plan. I think that's quite disingenuous and really unfair. It's about celebrating their story and packaging it in a way, in a visual identity that actually works fundamentally. So this is a branding system for the Ninevites, which is hand-woven rugs. They're really beautiful, and we're starting to roll out the packaging soon. So we're just getting that all ready. This is also an amazing project that I want to run through, Fields, which is also a new local manufacturing clothing label. And all the clothing is manufactured in South Africa, which is also really amazing. So nothing is outsourced. And all the artists that I used for the ranges are also South African. So I'm just flying through this quickly just to kind of show the type of work I do. And I think like, just because it's like relevant, with the Springboks playing tomorrow, hopefully they win, fingers crossed. Just some other work like where it works into like digital campaigns for the Springboks, their jersey launch. Sometimes there's a wallaby that needs to be put in there as well. But you know, the whole campaign is like it's digitally run. It's meant to kind of predominantly live on Instagram, which it does, where the whole feed is one kind of continuous kind of visual kind of journey to kind of align with their tagline of Move as One. And then sometimes it goes into retail. This was an amazing photograph they sent me last week from Japan, where the Springboks are on a massive billboard in Shibuya in Tokyo. And like, I didn't know that was going to happen, but that's like still for me today, like when I was small in high school, the thing that really like was my muse was like when you would make something and it would be tangible and you can feel it in your hands. It's like, this is part of me, this is who I am, and this thing's existing now. It's like it's outside of a computer screen. I think that still for me is such a rewarding kind of feeling. So the same way I felt about I Eat Soup, and I see this, that feeling, that muse of emotion, is still the same for me. Of course, just on like a different scale, but like still that the feeling is still the same. And then just some retail work as well that's being rolled out into stores in Japan currently. But what I want to talk about is, so where does muse come from and how to find it? So I think it might raise a few questions, like how can you find muse or inspiration? How can you talk about it in a tangible or intangible way? But I really think it's both. I think being inspired or muse is something that it can be a feeling, it can be a person, it can be an object. It can be anything that's how you relate to something that drives you. So I think behind every muse there's motivation. To kind of give you like a idea of the process of my day-to-day and how projects work. So I would receive an email, something like this, Dear Daniel, okay, I won't read all of it, but the client just wanted to use wanted to launch a food trailer, and then they will ask me, how do we get started? And often this is the most pivotal part of any project that I do, is that I do like quite a heavy kind of interview or kind of really relaxed question or kind of meeting with a client and kind of distill from them what their story is or where they came from and why they want to do the things that they want to do now. Like, why are you launching this brand? What are you trying to achieve? And I think out of these sessions, a lot of the conceptual inspiration comes to mind. So long story short, they wanted to start a food trailer brand. They met in the UK, the hotel. They've been in the food industry for years. They have a family. And these were like very key words that were pivotal for the conceptual thinking. So a lot of the time, we look for inspiration, but often it's finding it through the client or through someone else. We don't often have to, like you get visual inspiration, like you can easily look at something on the internet, but I think specifically for brand building, the storytelling from the client is so important. So they didn't have a name, but they just said to me, we're starting a food service out of a food truck. Can you also do the name development? So I wouldn't show them all these names. This is just something I do from my side, and I only show them maybe 3 options to kind of fine-tune the direction. So I'll go through all these options, but naming convention for me is one of the most exciting parts of any brand building for me, almost better than the actual creation of like a word mark or any other systems. Because I think like a name, it consolidates the thinking and strategy going forward for the brand, and a lot can go forward. So after going through these, we landed on Nice Neighbor, and after a lot of research and talking to them and finding out about their story, what was nice about this insight was like, if sometimes back in the old days, if a new neighbor would move into your street, they would like cook a meal for the whole road, or people would cook a meal for them. And I thought that was such like a beautiful gesture. And that's kind of that story or insight was leveraged this whole brand. And of course, because they're a food trailer, they're going to be traveling throughout South Africa, and they've got to be respectful wherever they kind of park and have their food offering. So I thought it was such a nice kind of gesture, and the name kind of was quite positive. And they're very lighthearted and relaxed, and they wanted something that had that kind of tonality. So like an image like this was kind of like really solidifies kind of that what Nice Neighbor, that essence. But it's quite hard because it's like, where do we go from here? So that's like an image, but now we have to now build this brand somehow. So often, like I know this will also people will probably like start getting up and walking out, but the internet is the most uninspiring place for ideas. So I obviously use the internet for research, and I may predominantly use it for research. I think like things like Pinterest, Behance, Instagram even are like super hindrances to creative kind of muse or inspiration, because I think when you look at things resolved on the internet, you're not really solving anything in your own mind. You're looking at stuff that's really beautifully shot, that's been worked on for months and months, and you think like, okay, cool, I can just do that. But I think you need to do the heavy lifting, and you really got to push through outside of being on the internet, looking at Pinterest and stuff for ideas. I've worked on multiple projects with different teams, and people come to me like, I have this great idea, I saw it on Pinterest. I was like, that sentence in itself like really doesn't make sense, because it's not really an idea if you saw it on the internet. So I mean, of course, there's visual inspiration on how like typography or colors can work, but I think when you're trying to resolve a branding system, the worst thing is to jump on the internet. For me, I do research first. I think that's always like the fundamental or foundation to any great brand or idea going forward. And often, like, I can't draw really well. I promise you, I really can't draw well. So like my drawings still look like when I was in high school. So like I would go through different like words, different lockups and thoughts on like what, like, so this is specifically for Nice Neighbor, so I'd quickly look at monograms. And these are like quick sketches that I do within like 5 to 10 minutes. And I write a lot, which helps with just the thinking. So first I'll do that. I'll look at online at other research about how we could elevate the story through research or insight. Sometimes I do both at the same time. Sometimes I'll sketch and I'll be on the computer. I don't think there's like a specific methodology to follow, like X plus Y equals like a great concept. Often I'll do renderings on a computer just because it's much quicker, and I think that's the whole point of a computer as well. So I'll look at different typefaces, I'll do different tests on color systems and how it could work, but also like what feelings come through and is it aligned with the client's kind of story, and I think that's really important. So for Nice Neighbor, I wanted to do something that felt quite homely. They wanted to feel like you walked into their grandmother's house. Like that was something they said to me in an interview. And I thought that was also such a beautiful kind of angle to have. So a lot of the kind of visual elements relate to things that you would find in your own home or your grandmother's house, for example. So looking at different typefaces, I'll do different sketches. I was looking at old cross-hatching kind of illustrations as well, just because of the fact that they mentioned that they wanted like an old kind of homely feeling. And then from there, I would start to build it out and do other sketches. And, you know, like because I can't draw like super realistically or like really well, like this is something I'll do in 5 seconds, and like it might be like a little joke. But actually sometimes like when you review the work afterwards, there's a lot that can come from like a really silly sketch like this. So when I was growing up, I remember there was these things called safe houses, and there were like these yellow plaques that was in shape of a house with a smiley face, and it meant that like if you were ever in danger, you could run to that house. So a smiley face, that kind of insight or that feeling, I was inspired by that, and that was something I wanted to bring with Nice Neighbor, because it was like you going to someone's house for a meal. So from that sketch, like that leveraged into like a brand mark where we simply like we're not rebuilding the whole wheel here. Like a smiley face with 2 ends for Nice Neighbor was something enough. It didn't have to be overly designed. Sometimes when something is easily digestible for the client, it's easily digestible for consumers, which is important. From there, you know, not going into Pinterest, I went to the Milton market, which is an amazing place, regardless if you're doing a client brief or whatever. A lot of these elements were inspirational for kind of the tonality or the way that the typography looks for Nice Neighbor, but also like I needed to buy some stuff for their trailer. So like we got different door handles, different numbers and stuff for the trailer, because it's moving around South Africa, technically you would need a new address. So there was like different numbers that we would put on the trailer. But a lot of this kind of research and these elements were big inspirations for the actual visual rollout of the project. So it's quite eclectic, different kind of ornate shapes. And that's why I kind of rested on this kind of word mark in the way that it looks, because I was looking at a lot at like these kind of the old numbers and some of the type on the things where they had like these very interesting serifs. And also because we wanted to do a chrome finish on the type so it gets put onto the vehicle, because it's also a car, so that also felt nice that relationship was there. These are just renderings of what it would want it to be like. We're changing it a lot now because we were unfortunate not to get the Citroen, unfortunately. This was the rollout of the color palette and then some of the symbols and stuff like that. And I think, you know, like different things that have feelings, like a key, like what that says, it has access. And that's something that we wanted to really build in these positive kind of brand attributes for Nice Neighbor. So even with the set of keys, there's also like the 2 holes, which doesn't really make sense, but we wanted to emulate the smiley face still in the different brand marks. And just other things like you would find in a house, like an old vase with like a beautiful set of flowers, is like that feeling of going into like your grandmother's house or your mom's house. That's the emotion, that's the muse that we try to build in the brand. Again, this is like heavy reliance on the safe house sign. So still trying to incorporate with the smiley face, even with the curved type, but just to have like a negative and positive play with the lockup. I also tried to get different typography in. They wanted a monogram, and I wasn't sure if that was right for the brand, but they wanted it, and there was a nice resolve to fit the two ends together with the inline, and obviously the black as nice neighbor for the two ends together. So sometimes those relationships can just like really work quite well. Because they're going to be at festivals and different locations, like signage was a big part of the branding system. And what better thing than an arrow in a house, a really tall house. So yeah, I mean, it's really out of proportion, but it's just nice that we can fit in these playful, humorous things. And while I was working on this, I still think about all the old work that I did before the I magazine. And whenever I make something, I always have the person in mind. I know it's kind of weird, but I always think of those people when I'm making something because it's for them. And I think about them as a person, what they're into, how they speak. And it's more just to really kind of funnels like creativity and thinking going forward. So like an overview of the brand, like this is the word mark, the primary brand mark, and the subset symbols and additional pattern stuff. So like a lot of the work at the bottom was referencing like old doilies that you would find in your grandmother's place. Yeah, and this was just additional markup treatments for the clients, where it was accessible for them. So they're actually based in Pretoria and they move around a lot, so they would need elements like stamps and stickers that are easily brandable on things. They're actually looking at a brick and mortar space now, so this was a treatment just to show them how that could work with like the different numbers, but still leveraging a lot of those additional brand marks to bring everything together, and like a very specific color system. So yeah, I mean, eco-friendly packaging is something obviously they want to incorporate, but just things that were easily for them to, I mean, they're not designers. Like if this was my brand, I'd probably spend hours and hours like placing a sticker and a stamp, but they just needed something that would organically work on the go because they're traveling all the time. This was treatments for aprons, but I still work very old school in a way. Maybe it's just because I don't have access to a lot of tools, maybe at the studio. But I still cut out a lot. I still make a lot of things with my hands to do tests before they go out to pre-production. So this was a test I did just for like scale of how big should some of the brand marks be. Is the typography like legible enough? So obviously, like when you make work, you can be inspired by a lot of things, but I think you need a foundation and good fundamentals in anything you do in your life, whether you in sports or if you're creative role, you need fundamentals to be good at something. So you got to do the work and understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. So these were just some tests I did for the aprons, and then this was the final product with silkscreen. So I was really concerned about the key kind of brand mark because the type was punched out. I was very worried it wouldn't hold out. But understanding the process of when in high school I was working for all those YDE companies, and I did a lot of prints for t-shirts and denim and working with different materials, I understood that production method. So the more things you know, obviously you can think of and understand. So it's always good to just, even if it's outside of your category or your discipline, like whether you're, like when I think about my work when I was in high school, I mean, I didn't know I was going to do the work I did now, but I tried to expose myself to things outside of graphic design. And I think that's the beautiful thing nowadays where we are now, with technology changing and disciplines kind of having crossovers, you need to kind of expose yourself to a lot of things and have understanding of different systems, which will help you with anything that you do. I always think it's important to rethink like what you're doing in terms of, well really, I always say this, like, so the guys in CZ and local know, like I always say to them, like, we want to make stuff that people want to steal, and that's really important. and it's true though, it's like, so example, that's the first slide I had up at the president with that glitter silkscreen, that pop-up. So that client wanted an A4 brochure for the World Cup. And we said at that time, like, we'll make your pop-up that's silkscreen and gold glitter. That sounds way better. And I just think there's always conventional things that we get stuck into, like our jobs. Like if someone says we want a business card, you're automatically like, okay, it's going to be rectangular. We'll set the type on the front or the back, and then that's it. But it's like, why do things have to be the way that they are? Because lots of other people do it. So I always think it's a good idea to make things that people want to steal, because then you know that they're going to keep it and they're going to use it, or they're going to put it up somewhere, and that has more value in the world than printing a business card that's going to be in the trash probably in half an hour later. So the client, nice neighbor, they said they wanted business cards. So I was like, well, we can do coasters, you need them anyway. But we can do coasters and that act as a business card at the same time, and people will more than likely steal them when they come to sit. So it's always important to make stuff. And I also just think like production of stuff is so unnecessary if people are just going to throw it away. Like there's a lot of waste that comes involved with design, and I think it's important to be kind of conscious about that kind of stuff and the papers that we use. This is just more rollout elements for Nice Neighbor. And then, so that kind of like sums up like how a tackle a project from a brand identity system. A lot of you might ask, a lot of questions I get a lot of times like, what do you do with creative block? Like, I'm so stressed at work, the deadline is tomorrow, how do I overcome this? And I think Muse is something that is tangible and that you can tap into at any given moment. So a lot of the time when I get stuck and I can't think of anything, I'm not jumping on the internet, I'm not looking at Pinterest. But what I like to do is, actually, funny enough, Muse in 60 seconds sounds like God in 60 seconds, but anyway. What I do is I set myself a minute or 2 minutes, and I quickly write down as many words as possible relating to the project. And those are just thoughts that I have. So, like, it could be bright, fierce, size, jumbo, super jumbo. These are all just things I quickly write to help kind of like almost kickstart thinking and thinking outside of like being stuck in the brief all the time. And then from that, as you can see, I can't draw very well, but after that I try and redraw those words. So whatever words I have, I'll try and do a visual interpretation of that, which I really find helps with brand marks or any kind of thinking really. You're just trying to relate like a word and a visual identity together. And I feel like that's really like quite a quick mechanism to try and get your thinking outside. And then honestly, like if you're really stuck, just step away from it, go outside for a bit, that always helps. And to kind of like sum it up really, like Muse is a relationship. Sometimes we need reminders of how we fell in love. So like in whatever you're doing, in any relationship, you often need kind of reminders of like, why am I doing the thing that I'm doing and why is it important? And I always think back to my IE2 project, and you know, it's important to kind of not take it yourself too seriously, like step back and really think about why am I spending my whole day doing the thing that I'm doing and why is it important to me? And that's why I think behind every muse there's a motivation. So like my muse when I was in high school is different to how my muse is now, because I have a family now, so that's motivation, it's not my inspiration. But your responsibilities change, and I think it's always good to have kind of a reminder of why I am doing the things I'm doing and why I enjoy it. So growing up, I loved MF Doom, who's a rapper, for who you don't know, some of you might not know, but he's an amazing rapper that I really like because he's just really intelligent with the way that he links words and uses kind of English together. Obviously Michael Jordan is amazing. So funny enough, I play basketball, so some of you might not believe, but my position is more like a scrum half comparison, so like my height doesn't really need to kind of factor in too much. But I've been playing basketball since I was 11 for like a local community, just an observatory. So Michael Jordan was a huge inspiration for me specifically. So these were like my actual muses, like if I had to say, like who was my muse when I was growing up. And I would make a lot of work for myself based on those muses. So supervillain is like a term that MF Doom would use a lot because he talks about like comics and him as like a villain. So often I would use those things as jump starters to test out different typography techniques, colors, and photography and layout. So like these were some photos I took when I was in South Korea maybe 2 years ago. And like honestly, like when you go on travel photos, you take like 1 million photos and they just sit on your computer. So I was like, let me just actually use these things for something. So at least once a week I try and do experimentational work where it's just work for myself. There's no client involved. It's more just about understanding why I still love design, or I love trying to make this work. And like just other silly things like the lotto, like different typography things, like different textures and overlays, or how to emulate like a foil, or like this one on the left I try to work with like a net, and I'll try to mimic that. So I built that in Illustrator, then took it into Photoshop and added the shadows to try and make it look realistic. And just silly things like that, but this is all for me. So like this isn't going to go on my portfolio, but learning through play, like the IEC project when I was 16 was so important. Like I didn't know how to use Flash or Photoshop. I kind of was just going as I was going. But that was the exciting part for me, and that's why I fell in love with design. I still love learning. I love trying to figure out systems together, and that's a muse for me that I still try and practice today. And obviously with like a huge inspiration for Michael Jordan, like I don't really like the Bulls, but they have the best kind of like brand icon, I still think. But you know, like this is something I would do in a week where I'll just muck around with like different textures and markups and how to integrate maybe like 23 with the Bulls kind of brand mark. The one on the right, I really tried to emulate like the feeling of Michael Jordan doing the reverse dunk in like a photographic way with typography. And this is stuff I do for myself, which I think is really important for anyone to do, whatever creative field you're in, or even not. I think you need to understand why you're doing the things you're doing and why you love it. I mean, like numbers is always important. So like 8 obviously has a lot of like symbolic kind of meanings, but I actually like number 8 as well because my favorite like football player is Steven Gerrard, and he wears number 8. So like this week, I like really wanted to work with the number 8, but I wanted to try and emulate the feeling of infinity. That's why it kind of like descends into like a dark space and it looks like a cone shape. But I wanted to have like a really hard kind of chiseled edge. So that was like my goal for this week. And often like people will be like, well, how do you find the time to do this? Like with briefs and all this stuff. Like you literally just have to make the time. And I think with anything you do, it's really how good you want to be at something. Like if you want to be good at something, you just have to be good and you want to have that drive and motivation to be good. I think like I don't really believe people are born with talents or anything like that. I think it really comes down to hard work and like good work ethic. And if you really want to be good at something, you'll go through like all the hoops to understand and try and practice and be good at it. So from this test, I wanted to make something that looked more chrome and shiny and gold, but still kind of using like a 3 kind of stroke test. So like this test was like really important for me because it related back to the Nice Neighbor chrome finish. So doing this test, I understood how to make something look like really shiny. So like for Nice Neighbor, to show the client how chrome plating would look, through this test, it helped me understand how to do that for my actual client work. This is just more like basketball inspired, mixing typography and like the player's name or initials with the number. And yeah, I mean, like you can see basketball is like quite a common thread, but like this is stuff like muses I just use in my life to make like an excuse to make work. Because I enjoy basketball, like I love making things that relate to basketball. And within saying that, this was like a collaboration I did with Tubak, which is also like a local clothing brand, like years ago where we did like a basketball range. And like it's funny, like the work that you put out there, even as tests, is the work that you're gonna get. Yeah. So like often on my website, I'll take down work that I don't want to do anymore. So initially when I went independent, I did like a million of these little icon things, like monoline icon drawings and stuff. And I like every brief was like, can you do like an icon pack? And I was just like, I can't do any more of these icons. And like you have to curate yourself. Like I've taken all that work off my side, because that's not the work I want to do. So I think like, you know, to sum it up, like your muse changes as you go. It's something organic and tangible, and it's different for everyone. But I think what's important is that you can always tap into it. It's accessible, and that's it's like I was saying, behind every muse there's a motivation, and behind like these tests that I do, it's just like for myself, and that's also important practice. In any career that you do, you should try and love what you do. You know, like some people might say like, you know, like we joke around in the studio sometimes, like when people go like, what's your inspiration? And someone says money. Like, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like if your inspiration is to make lots of money, that's totally fine. And that shouldn't be something that's shameful. And I think that's, you know, that's why everyone's muse is slightly different all the time. And this is just like one last slide on like another test that I just did for myself. Just mixing typography. It's actually just an excuse to look at different typefaces and get like different techniques. Thank you.